begin to know how to tell people what to do. We talked, should we say anything about this? The feds would never tell us.
No, but I'm quite convinced that if you read both Cottrell and Morris's Cottrell's book, and then especially the Mayan prophecies, and then you read Carroll's book, you become aware of the mathematics. The mathematics is very straightforward once you grasp the way it
now,
was.
When you say that, excuse me, but when you say mathematics don't lie, okay, we know that it's the voice of the universe. We know that too. How easy is it to understand the math? Now, you're a brilliant man. I mean,
you can leave a lot of the confusing numbers out. What you care about are the basic concepts, that the sun's equator spins faster than the poles, and that this causes a distortion and a tweaking of the magnetic.
Which is shown in those wonderful drawings. Okay.
Yeah, and basically you needn't care about the numbers much more than the difference between the 25-day rotation and the 37-day rotation, producing an extra lap every 87 days. And then if you really wanted to calculate it out down to a specific level and follow it along, Carroll provides all the numbers you need, and you get yourself a calculator, and you find out that all of the numbers he provides in his book are extremely accurate. And the same thing is true of Cottrell. Now, here's the issue. These numbers are extremely precise down to the 10,000th part, out 5 points beyond the decimal point.
Gee.
Okay, so how did the Mayans know this without these calculators? How did the Egyptians know them, and so on? And the fact that they went to such a great degree of trouble to encode very specific numbers that have these interesting little repeating patterns and cannot be mistaken for any other number, and they encoded them repeatedly within their systems, kept pointing back to this same event. And if you eliminate the religious bent from Cottrell's work and just look at what he's describing, and then take his interpretation off of it and continue to look at it in Carroll's fashion, you see precisely what Carroll says, that these people were trying to tell us that this stuff can be calculated down to the day, because it is a physical process every bit as real as the astronomy involved in predicting where the sun will arise on a specific day. Once you know the precession of the equinox, you can calculate that, on the first day of spring, the sun will be here. On the first day of fall, it'll be there, etc. And in between, it'll rise this high. You can do it predictably and thus navigate around the planet. We've done it for hundreds of years using the sextants and so on. It's that same level of predictable math that is involved in these sunspot cycles. As long as you get away from the academic view of it all and you look at it in unschooled but very educated eyes. Carroll has spent like 40 years researching his stuff. I've done probably 30 years of reading in the Vedic and the Asian traditions the same numbers without recognizing what I was seeing until I saw the code being explained to me for the Mayan component. And then it's like, well, duh, I should have caught on to that 15 or 20 years ago. But now that I've grasped it, it's rather startling. And basically, if we had 2 more bits of information, we could even predict it down to the hour. But that may not be necessary because the powers that be may be slapping us in the face with it. If you look on the back of your dollar bill, it says Nova Order Seclorum, which does not mean New World Order. It means New Order of the Ages. And one of the predictable effects of this is that the precession gets all wonky. So we think we're going into the age of Aquarius. The sun's going to spin us around, and the earth's going to spin around and heave, and all of a sudden we'll be in the age of Taurus or something based on where we end up. And we start all over again, and the precession gets a little bit stranger. And hopefully this time we'll get it right and come through with enough of the goodies of civilization to get a jump on things.
A lot of people are wondering, all right, what do we do? How do we prepare? We don't have time to build a boat. We don't live near the ocean.
No, that's not true. That's not true. You've got 1,000 days. You can build a boat in 1,000 days.
And then part 2, those that we live in the middle of Nebraska, do we build a boat there or whatever? All right, hang on. We'll talk about the practicalities of trying to survive with maybe a pretty nasty set of circumstances, as they say. In just a couple of minutes. Hey, and we're back with Cliff High, talking about all kinds of things. Now, Cliff is partial to boats. Since we don't know, and as we made clear, you spelled it out, this could be fits and starts. It's not going to be one huge, necessarily, event. It could be a lot of them on a big run-up to a fairly major catastrophe. A lot of minor catastrophes. It could be lots of fun. Anyway, what if someone doesn't have a boat, doesn't like boats, wants to dig in? Can they do that? And if they dig in, they're going to need to dig in for how many days? Till the water recedes back to the the natural seabeds.
Well, if they're high enough, they would be, above that, theoretically. Because we don't know how...
we don't know how high, though. Gerald says 7,000 feet, but he could be wrong by 4,000 or 5,000 feet. We don't know.
No, actually, I think that there are physical limits as to how high water can actually go under ordinary circumstances. You can calculate these. You're taught them in oceanography. You can figure out how big a tsunami is going to be based on the coast and so on. Usually the wave height is relatively a lot less than we can think about. Now, it is true that the oceans are going to want to crawl out of their beds and crawl across the land. However, there's Russians that have been doing a significant amount of work on this, and they say that, well, based on the fact that life still exists and that here's the parameters that it takes for life to exist. In other words, you can't have an atmosphere that soars up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, you can't have continents move at this speed because they generate so much heat in the form of friction that they would heat the atmosphere and everything would die.
Okay, very important point. You went real fast on that. Please do that again, slower.
Okay,
if the crust moves too fast,
you get vast quantities of friction. And because the crust will shift in a particular way and the atmosphere will respond in a particular way, you'd get this huge amount of friction that would cause the atmosphere to superheat. And we know this has never happened in the past, therefore we can assume it never got that fast in terms of the continent spinning, because it would have wiped out all of life, and we know that that did not occur. Since basically it's this logic that since we've survived it in the past and we know what it takes to kill humans, all of us, then we know that it never happened, therefore we know it was less than that. And we've made calculations on this. For instance, the Russians have done some staggering calculations and said that none of the bones of these baby mammoths that were frozen solid, almost frozen instantly, when Siberia flipped into its current position, and the last of these none of these mammoths had bones that broke at any of the strategic spots within the leg prior to the shuddering impact. In other words, they weren't killed by the spinning rotation.
Right.
They weren't thrown to the ground and bounced around.
Right.
Therefore, they calculated that it could not have occurred and been faster than X number of meters per second, or basically couldn't have been much faster than 35 or 40 miles per hour up to a range of perhaps about 60 miles an hour relative to the mammoth standing on the ground. And so they wouldn't have really been aware of it if the whole ground had shifted at that level, and the conditions would still exist that would have allowed them to have been frozen standing still without broken leg bones. So, I mean, these people have been doing work on this for, somebody's paying them to do it too, but they've been doing it for months and months and months, because I found a huge amount of files that I was able to gradually start looking at in translating that goes just to this kind of an effect, just to the calculations involved. And, it's more than just a simple math exercise, because they've done a lot of strategic thinking and cross-tied and interdisciplinary kind of an approach. So we know that we've survived in the past. We know it can't be this fast, and it's likely going to occur 2 or 3 jerks to get even a huge revolution. 2 of these episodes back, in 21,000 BC, apparently the Earth spun 72 degrees within the arc of the precession. So that would be spinning basically like 3/4 of the way through the year almost, in terms of where you start off. So it'd be kind of weird, because you could start off in winter and end up in fall.
Got it.
And sort of miss the whole summer business, right? In any event, when that occurred, that was one of the more spectacularly damaging ones, and the Russians were able to say that, well, that one, in this particular instance, this mountain range was lifted up this high, and so we can calculate the amount of force that was involved to shove this other plate underneath it, and they've done even more calculations on it and said, okay, in that particular episode, we think that the level of water was about 800 meters. Well, 800 meters is still considerable, but it's not a mile and a half.
That's a lot of pressure, boy. That's huge pressure.
Yeah, but my point being that if you were up 2,000 or 3,000 meters in the hills, herding sheep or whatever, and this is the one that theoretically most of the Greek civilization...
Well, 3,000 meters is 9,000 feet, isn't it?
Correct. But I mean, if you were this was up 800 meters, less than 1,000 meters, so less than 3,000 feet. It was the level of the water. So if you were above that, you would have survived it. And also,
can you go up and can you drive up? You zip up the mountain and hang out there for a week?
I don't think that'll be the case. there's going to be huge amounts of earthquakes. I don't know that the infrastructure is going to survive. That is to say, roads and this kind of thing. We should have months of devastation beforehand. This won't be a sudden event that way. It won't sneak up on us, so to speak, right?
What if you build a Reichsbunker?
Then, well, you could, and then you may indeed be able to survive, but then you're going to be stuck up there if the water stays there. We have evidence, for instance, that areas of Utah that are 300 and 400 feet above flat plains were inhabited, and people lived in boats and got into these inhabited areas through boats over the course of several decades, 80 or 90 years, actually. So it'll be hard to predict that kind of thing.
Right.
Gerald has some ideas, and some of his ideas make sense. And if I've got an astronomer who's trying to calculate it, and here's my thinking. The Giza Plateau and the arrangement of the Nile River Valley and all of this is known to replicate stars in space, and in terms of their arrangement of Orion's belt and so on. Giza Plateau also encompasses